Paladin vs. Shadow Priest. Okay, so the first thing to know about the Paladin vs. Shadow Priest matchup is that if you do not want to fight said Shadow Priest for whatever reason, as long as you run away in a straight line and you have any semblance of mana left to cleanse yourself with, then there is no way for any priest to kill you ever, let alone a Shadow Priest. Thus, the only real way that you can actually lose to a priest is to stay too long in combat with them with the wrong gear, and having too much of your mana bar burned away before you decide to actually flee. Now, what this basically means is that in the event that you get jumped by a Shadow Priest, and you are not in the proper resist gear to fight them, you can either just peace out, or use your speed boots to drop combat long enough to gear swap, and then re-engage said priest. Thus, this Paladin vs. Priest guide will focus primarily on you having enough shadow resist gear, as laid out in my Fighting Casters Overview video, to execute a hybrid PvP combat style, as the heavy DPS low resist combat style tends to do very poorly in this matchup. However, it might be viable with a little bit of shadow resist gear and that 4k mana bar I keep insisting that you should try and have with a two-handed Ret or Ret Reckoning Paladin, so feel free to go and prove me wrong. For now, however, this fight will assume that you are in the standard default Paladin gear setup as seen here, with some resist gear thrown into the mix, to hit roughly a 100 shadow resist mark, or whatever critical number your character needs to be barely unkillable to the caster you are planning on fighting. So the first thing you are going to want to do, besides make sure that you have the right gear for this fight, is to get on top of the Shadow Priests and start beating on them, trying to make them use up as much of their mana as possible on their shields. During this time, most Shadow Priests will be mana burning you, after having spent some time attempting to purge away your buffs. Now, for your part, it is important to know that a priest's purge costs 258 mana, or around 4% of their mana bar total, and you should be attempting to make it your business to make the priest waste as many purges on you as possible. So, for example, Blessing of Wisdom max rank is 110 mana, Seal of Wisdom is 200 mana to cast and 288 mana to judge. Max rank Shadow Word Pain is 470 mana, the stupid blue channeling ability Mind Flay is 205 mana, and your cleanse is roughly 120 mana. The point is that if you know both your mana costs and your opponent's mana costs in this matchup, you can abuse this information in the extreme. So always try to keep Blessing of Wisdom up on you max rank. If they toss out multiple purges to get it off of you, simply refuse to let it fall off, as the mana trade is grossly in your favor. Try to keep Judgment of Wisdom on your target at all times, typically by casting Seal of Wisdom right before a melee strike, then after the hit, judge it into the priest. Then activate a cheap rank of either SOR or Seal of Command, depending on what type of paladin you are. Now, the reason for this use of Judgment of Wisdom against a Shadow Priest versus, say, judging damage into them, is if they do not purge remove it off of themselves quickly, then the mana pullback from it can be rather extreme, and results in you never really feeling like you are out of mana as the paladin. Make no mistake, however, you might be running on fumes, but the difference between a paladin with a little mana to work with and a paladin with no mana to work with is as night versus day. Furthermore, if they quickly purge the judgment, which is the smart thing for them to do, then they are trading mana with you at a near 1-to-1 ratio. And if the fight ever comes down to an out-of-mana priest versus an out-of-mana paladin, then the paladin is going to win that fight rather easily. Furthermore, it costs them time to purge. Time that is 1.5 more seconds of DPS that you get to pump into said priest that you otherwise would not have gotten by judging damage into them. Now, I will spare you the math, but suffice it to say that you end up doing as much if not more damage to the priest from them purging it off of you than if you had simply judged damage onto them, on top of the more than even mana trade that you were eliciting from this situation. So in total, just so we are clear, while you have the mana to do so, you are going to want to try to keep Blessing of Wisdom up on you at all times. You are going to want to attempt to keep Judgment of Wisdom on the priest as much as possible, with an eye to get as much mana pullback out of it as possible. And you are going to want to use a rather low rank of damage seal for your weapon on account of the fact that Purge on you will remove both your seal and your Blessing of Wisdom from you. So try to keep it as not cost effective for the priest as possible. Furthermore, if you have the time and the mana, which you may or may not have, it is often worth 4 or more cleanses to get off a max rank Shadow Word Pain from you. This is good information to know, as you will often have to cleanse through multiple Shadow Weaving debuffs in order to get at that pesky Shadow Word Pain. Okay, so, that massive info dump aside, let's look at how the matchup actually plays out knowing our little mana war tricks. So first you are going to want to close with the Shadow Priest. Likely they will try some running away action while purging you repeatedly as you refuse to let your Blessing of Wisdom fall off. Then after they get the message, out will come repeated castings of rank 1 Shadow Word Pain in order to get 5 stacks of Shadow Weaving on you. Feel free to start spending cleanses to get at the max rank Shadow Word Pain if you suspect it has been cast on you, which should be fairly obvious, as their mana bar will go down significantly from the cost of it. Once the priest is done screwing around, he will eventually root himself in place and start casting mana burns on you, with about 85% mana left in the tank. Now from here it is going to take the priest a very specific number of mana burns, and thus time and mana, to completely drain you of mana. This number of mana burns depends on just how much mana you have, and how many resists you get during the process. For Holy Paladins, this number of mana burns will likely be around 7, and for non-Holy Paladins closer to 5, 6,000 versus 4,000 mana burned away respectively. Now while the priest is taking upwards of 20 plus seconds to fully burn away your mana due to pushback and having to recast Bubble and maybe Purges, the mana pullback you are likely experiencing from Judgment of Wisdom is going to be a little nuts, as depending upon the seal you are using, it is likely to be around 150 MP5 or more, and will subsequently cost the priest either another mana burn to overcome, or start generating the problems we discussed earlier with taking the time to purge it off. In either case, you are now looking at a priest that has spent well over 50% of their mana pool just trying to deplete you of yours. Now the only thing to really keep in mind here is to make sure to use the very last of your mana to heal yourself, essentially making sure that whatever happens, you are at full life with no mana, not half life with no mana, when the priest finally finishes mana burning you. Now once they are done draining your mana, they will fear you and start going ham with their offensive damaging spells. Now it is at this point that you might be asking, why didn't this priest fear you before starting the mana burn cycle, or halfway before it was done if it was going to take so long? The answer to that is, if they fear you too early, then you have plenty of mana left to run away and simply reset the fight. So if they are serious about killing you, the play will be to hold off on the fear until they have completely depleted your mana bar. Otherwise, just run away and try again once topped off on mana and mounted. Or, trinket that fear and go ham if you suspect their gear is inferior to yours, and especially if you have mithril insignia. Okay, so, now we find ourselves at full life, with the tiniest embers of mana left in the tank from whatever Judgment and Blessing of Wisdom have granted us, and feared. For the priest's condition, they are likely near full life and close to 40% of their mana bar remaining. Now, what you do from here as the Paladin really depends on whether or not you have mithril insignia, as it is a blacksmith-only trinket that pretty much causes the Paladin to auto-win face roll style versus most priests and warlocks from this point. But if you do not have mithril insignia, you are going to want to suffer this fear, and compensate by having a bit more shadow resist gear. For example, Shadow Reflector is a good substitute for Mithril Insignia here, as not only does it give massive amounts of bonus shadow resistance, it can also be used to reflect at least one mana burn back at the Shadow Priest and buy you a few more seconds of mana regen DPS, which ultimately in this fight is huge. So if you do not have Mithril Insignia, suffer the fear, take the damage, and do your best to not have to use Bubble. If you are forced to use Bubble, take the time while bandaging to take stock of the situation and contemplate whether or not you think you can take this Shadow Priest with the mana they currently have compared to yours inside of the 30-second time on target window that you can still generate for yourself with your PvP trinket. Or whether you should use your remaining mana from Mana Pot and Dragon Fruit to take the draw and simply run away. Personally, just to be safe, I would take the draw, unless the priest is at 10% mana or less, as you have to assume that they too can bump that number up with Mana Pot and Dragon Fruit, putting them closer to 40% mana remaining and easily within strike range to kill you, or for it to end with a draw if you stay. Now, if you do survive the fear without having to bubble, which is far more likely the case, immediately go for a Flash of Light heal, which you should have more than enough mana to do. This will force out the silence from the Shadow Priest, which may or may not bounce off of you with all the shadow resistance gear you're wearing. If it lands, just wait it out a bit by running away in a straight line until you can heal, and then go for some big juicy heals. Preferably with the super time efficient Holy Lights with the use of a single Dragon Fruit, which you should have plenty of time for, as both Holy Light and Mana Burn have a 2.5 second cast time. Bonus points if you are Holy and that heal is a free critical, guaranteed to force out a Mana Burn from the Shadow Priest to prevent any further healing. Now from this point there are really only two possibilities. Either you have Trinket plus Mithril Insignia but no Bubble, or you have Trinket and Bubble but no Mithril Insignia. In either case, it is go time against this Shadow Priest, who likely no longer has enough mana to mathematically kill you. As you are about to pop some speed boots, close with them, and beat them to death while regenerating your resources over 40 to 60 seconds while shrugging off their repeated fear attempts. Keep in mind that they will also likely be coming to the conclusion that they might be screwed about the time you activate your speed boots, and so will be looking to kite you as best as they can. Thus, standard rules for catching fleeing targets apply. Nades, speed pots, pesky offhand item usages, frost oil. Just go do what it is that you do best and go kill yourself an out-of-mana Shadow Priest, the same way you might kill a hunter if they get frisky with you. Now, I haven't mentioned it yet because I have been trying to lay down the tactics for all of the Paladin specs in general for this matchup. But weapons that are fast and allow you to heal off of your target, such as Skullforge Reaver and Edward the Odd, are likely king in this matchup on account of the fact that they help your survivability in so many ways. But I bring it up now because things are about to get horror movie levels of scary for said Shadow Priest, if you in fact have them. So, going back to our little crossroads point, where you as the Paladin are all but out of mana and the Shadow Priest is about to fear you and go ham, if you have Mithril Insignia instead of Shadow Reflector, you might consider trinketing the first fear and putting your faith in Edward the Odd and the mana pullback from Judgment of Wisdom, Dragon Fruit, Mana Pot, and offhand heals like Medicine Pouch, along with the pushback you are surely doing to this priest from weapon attacks or Skelly Pet Summon, to simply stand toe-to-toe with this poor fool who rolled the wrong class and just grind them into pulp. Just remember to try and cleanse the priest's channel damage ability fairly religiously, and 80% of the time you can easily go toe-to-toe with any Shadow Priest, as the combination of sustained pushback and ever-depleting mana levels on the priest will just be too much for them to handle. Back that up with the fact that even if they force you to bubble round about 20 seconds into this stage of the fight, after having torn through almost 2 full health bars, you have plenty of time to bandage up, heal with what mana you have, throw a grenade for the lulz, and easily chase down this poor, nearly tapped out of mana Shadow Priest with rocket boots. All the while, your Skelly Summon pet or Nade prevents them from eating and drinking. Just Mithril Insignia the last fear they will ever make, and finish them off at your leisure. Now you might be wondering how on earth can a Paladin take on and so easily beat a Shadow Priest who has mana burn, fear, and seemingly all of the advantages. The answer to that is that the Shadow Priest's failing as a class isn't in their DPS, nor their durability, nor their mobility. It is in their mana bar. For example, for a priest to completely drain a paladin of mana often costs them 40% of their mana bar total. It then costs them another 30% of their mana bar to force the paladin to bubble, and then a final 30% of their mana bar to kill the paladin if said paladin heals back to full during that bubble, which they often can. This is typically the state of affairs for the Shadow Priest vs. Paladin matchup, where the Paladin doesn't have any additional resist gear and isn't being mindful to do the little extra things to regenerate their mana and drain their opponents. All too often, Shadow Priests will beat lesser Paladin players with roughly 10% of their mana remaining, and with the 30% emergency mana bar that they can potentially get from Mana Pot and Dragon Fruit, this often makes them quite cocky in the Paladin vs. Shadow Priest matchup. However, with correct Mana War Pally playstyle, most Shadow Priests very quickly have to dip quite deeply into their bonus mana reserves, and with just a little extra Shadow Resist gear thrown on top of this, a good Paladin player can very quickly, deceptively mathematically be unkillable to the Shadow Priest, as they simply cannot muster enough mana to do so during the course of the fight. From this point, the only question becomes, can you kill the priest while being unkillable yourself? And the answer to that is, you can pretty much guarantee 30 to 60 seconds of beat stick time upon a Shadow Priest or more if a fear or two decides to bounce off of you even without Mithril Insignia. Now, if the priest was acting purely defensively and had large pools of mana held back in reserve for defense, then it is unlikely that the paladin could muster enough DPS within this space and time to actually kill them. They are just too tanky when they have mana. However, this line of play typically results in a draw, and so is rarely seen taken by most Shadow Priests. And as the Shadow Priest uses more and more of their mana to try and kill you, your odds of getting a kill on them only increases. Anyways, this has been PallyTime215 on how to Paladin vs. Shadow Priest. Feel free to watch my Versus Caster video, which covers this subject a bit more in detail, link in the description, and see what tactics work best for you in this matchup. Happy hunting!